Hello, my name is Jack Dangerman, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the GIS Day in 2021. This is our 21st anniversary for this day, and its purpose is really grounded in the idea of sharing the great work that the GIS professionals and our technology in our field is bringing to the world. Now, it's an amazing thing that happens every year. Thousands and thousands of people get together, they form little groups, they bring their maps, they show what they're doing, and it lays down good footprints. My good friend Will I Am says it's a time to soak it up like with a sponge and rinse it out. Not only learn today, but also share what you learn to other people. Because GIS is growing very rapidly, as we know. It's impacting almost every field on the planet. And nobody hardly knows about it compared to things like social media and the like. So this is an opportunity to share with children, showing them these professional activities that we do with maps and geographic data, and introduce also to executives and people who really don't know about our world, the whole idea of the geographic approach. Now this approach is all about integrating layers of information, seeing things holistically, communicating more effectively with maps. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for organizing this event, but also thank you very much for coming. Many of you are holding it in a virtual environment, which I'm really excited to see. While we miss being together, this new media is allowing us to expand even greater the reach of our great work, your great work really, using geography and GIS to make a better world. So thank you, enjoy the day.
All right, happy GIS Day, everyone, and welcome. My name is Chad, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by several of our panelists from our executive committee. Our agenda today looks like this. We're in the midst of the Welcome to GIS Day portion. Coming up next will be a presentation from Sharon Hawkins titled Here's Your Sign, followed by a break, another presentation from Patrick Dill, another break, and then to wrap things up this afternoon, a presentation from Robert Kacir, Introduction to OpenStreetMap, followed by our final door prize giveaway of the day. So in honor of GIS Day, today's proclamation reads as follows. Whereas the Arkansas GIS User Forum recognizes that an understanding, use, and application of geospatial technology is crucial to operating our infrastructure, sustaining our natural resources, and stimulating economic growth, thus benefiting the welfare of the general public throughout Arkansas. And whereas geographic information systems technology allows us to see and model complex relationships and patterns to more intelligently respond. And whereas there is a need to promote GIS awareness, education, and technical training to use this rapidly developing technology to its full potential. And whereas the Arkansas GIS Users Forum acknowledges those that have chosen GIS as their profession or as a part of their discipline to improve the lives of our citizens, and whereas to recognize and support the efforts of nonprofits who work on activities to improve conservation, human services, and various humanitarian efforts to better our world, and whereas having a GIS Day activities open to students, citizens, and government leaders will help promote STEM education and inspire others to a higher calling to use technology for good. And whereas the Arkansas GIS Users Forum is committed to utilizing GIS to inform decision-making and better serve our state and make useful geographic information open and easily available to the public as a platform for innovation. Now, therefore, the Arkansas GIS Users Forum proclaims November 17th, 2021 as GIS Day. So, after our presentations today, we will be giving away a total of 5 one-year ArcGIS for personal use subscriptions. The winners of these prizes will be chosen simply by answering a question. We'll pose that question after the presentation, and the first person to post the right answer into the chat will win this subscription. Also, we'll have a live Q&A at the end of each presentation. We would ask you at any time, if you have a question, to go ahead and use the Q&A option found in your Zoom control screen, and post that question throughout the presentation, and all of those questions will be answered at the end. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Sharon Hawkins, to present Here's Your Sign, an overview of the new sign inventory database at ArDOT. For many years, ArDOT sign inventory has consisted of paper, handwritten records. While the records are accurate and tell stories of new installations, locations, sizes, and types of signs, it hasn't always been easy to see that information needed quickly. In late 2020, ArDOT contracted with Fugro to perform a highway right-of-way inventory collection across the state. This presentation will talk about how having a mappable digital sign inventory will help to enhance safety across the state, as well as the tools in place for updates and maintenance of the data. Additionally, we'll look at signs across the state and how this data can help us find our way. So Sharon, we'll turn things over to you.
Chad, thank you so much for that introduction. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
We sure can. You are good to go.
Perfect. All right, and thank everybody out there for tuning in, and certainly happy GIS Day to everybody. Always an exciting day every year when it comes around. So again, Sharon Hawkins from the planning branch of the Arkansas Department of Transportation. And somebody that also helped me out with this presentation, his name is Kevin Weston. He works for the maintenance division at the department. He was not able to join me today, but I certainly wanted to give a shout out to him for helping put this together and for continuing to help out with this data. So here we go. So our presentation agenda is going to be why a sign database, how the signs were collected, cleaning up the database, maintaining the database, fun with signs, and are you waiting for a sign? So first, why a sign database? So personnel across the department started discussing the need for a digital GIS-oriented sign inventory in 2020. We've actually been discussing it for many years, but serious discussions in 2020. So why? So digital data to easily query out where are signs, for maps, for publications, for quick answers when administration has those. Analyzing the signs in areas that are under study. So are there enough signs in a certain area for safety concerns? Having a way to develop a speed limit database on the state highway system. Maintain archive and current inventory of signs so we can see what was there and so we can see if signs that were placed did in fact improve safety along that route. Help maintain traffic control database at the intersection. So we are required to put in what types of traffic control are at every intersection in the state. So this will certainly help out with that. And quickly calculate the quantity of signs that might need to be replaced along the route. And then we'd also like to step away from a manual or paper logging system. And really, the reason is to get easy to use data out to those that need it. So really the question is, why not a sign database, right? So, which is an important question. When we were approaching this, some members of administration gave us some advice, some warning, and they said, listen, before we start this, remember that approximately 40,000 signs are changed, added, removed, or temporarily placed each year. So temporarily placed might be construction signs. How are we going to maintain all of that movement of data? And then as soon as a sign is collected, 10% of signs are subject to change quickly across the state. You guys will see an example of that later on in the presentation. And then consider issues such as those construction signs, more than one sign on one post. How are you going to have those in the database? Different sizes of the same sign, right? So there are, normal size stop signs, but there are also larger size stop signs in some areas. And then how is the data going to be maintained, right? That's always the big question for us, right? How's that data going to be maintained? So we still decided to proceed, but proceed with caution. All right, so how the signs were collected. So we did contract with a company called Fugro. Okay, so we've been working with Fugro here at the department for many years. They have a vehicle called the ARAN, which collects video along our state highway system. We actually have one here at the department. We have a crew that goes out and they drive the roads. They're collecting this video. About every second, it's taking a picture, right, of where it is. It's putting a GPS point in the middle of that picture, so it's geographically located out there. This is like Google Street View on speed, right, for the state highway system for us here at the highway department. And then, we had different view tools that were able to look at that information in. And when we were talking with Fugro about this sign collection, they said, this is what we can offer you. We would be able to give you all these attributes that you see here on the screen. So, by the way, just a side note, this MUTCD is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices that all DOTs have to kind of abide by. So they can give all these attributes, including an image link of the sign, right? So when they collect the sign, all this information, we can click on the image link and actually see that picture on the road of that sign. And 1 mile of collection equals $20. And that was about 17,700 miles for them to collect that information. So let's just talk about how they did it. So very simply, this was the video, right? And their workers went through, and every time they saw a sign, they tagged that sign to get the accurate lat long, put in all the information about it, and down the road they went to collect more signs. So a lot of folks ask if this was done by artificial intelligence from that video, and it was not. It was not. There were actually 42 hired contractors with Fugro from a tip agency that they provide GIS analysts to Fugro. There were 3 Fugro employed high-level GIS analysts that were overseeing what the contractors were doing, and then 1 project manager that was overseeing everything else. We had several meetings in between. We looked at the pilot data, and they sent data, approximately every 3 weeks. So we could, just kind of watch this data build and do our own QA/QC on this end. So let's just take an example of one of these signs, okay? So here was the sign. Of course, we have the lat long for it. We also have the log mile location for it, or mile marker location for it. We love to live by our log miles here at the department. So, here it is displayed on the map. You can click on that, and it gives you all this information about the sign. And then, of course, you can click on that image link, and it brings up the image of that video so you can see that sign. So nice and straightforward to use, excellent data over here to query and perform analysis on. And then, here's just a nice picture, right? Listen, as a lady, I think ladies love things in miniature form, right? So, seeing all these signs on this aerial image, I just think it's adorable. But in all seriousness, being able for our field crews and folks here at the department, and eventually you out there to be able to see all this information, this is going to be a wonderful way to display it. All right, so next we're going to talk about cleaning up the data. Okay, so you guys know not everything's perfect, right? Not all data is perfect. That's why we have job security, right? So there are a few things. There were a few things anyway that we needed to look at and be able to clean up in the data. So one of the things we noticed is that when we ran the color, the MUTCD color field, we were getting duplicate colors. Well, that was because sometimes when the data was put in, they would put a space after the last letter in the color. So, for instance, our black signs, there was 4,200 black signs, but black with a space, there was 14 of those, right? So easy enough to, to find and kind of clean up. But then on the color signs, we saw this purple, right? And I was like, how in the world is there a purple sign? And there was only one, just one purple sign that was located. So it turns out this is in El Dorado along Highway 82. Here's the sign right here. It says Bob Watson Drive. So a sign that's pretty close to the right of way, not necessarily one of the signs that the department maintains, but one of the signs that those contractors picked up along the right of way. So there's that purple sign. Another example of cleaning up the data. So I mentioned earlier that this data was going to deliver us a sign, or excuse me, a speed limit database for the state. So just ran a query on Interstate 40, and we wanted to see all the speed limit signs. So ran that query, and it came up and it said that sign text, was going to be showing us our speed limit, so the text on the sign. And I saw a 20 miles per hour right here. I was like, well, that's weird. There's not a 20 mile per hour on the interstate system. So when we took a closer look, turned out that it was for this 20 mile an hour sign that was for the way station that was parallel to the interstate. So just things there that we can, clean up and know, pretty quickly. But then looking at speeds, we saw this 85 mile an hour sign. Now, nobody's allowed to do that anywhere in the state, so it's very curious. So we looked at the image link, and it looked like somebody turned a 25 mile an hour sign into an 85 mile an hour sign. So one of those contractors thought that they should put 85 in there. So again, just a few things to clean up, but makes great material for a presentation, right? I know. All right, so after cleaning up the data, let's talk about maintaining the data. So we're going to talk about maintaining the data with the video log, with paper log sheets, with a ArcGIS online field application, and then input from ArDOT users and users like you eventually. So first up, video log. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So as I said before, we have an ARAN here, a truck here, that we can drive our own road. We have the ability to drive down the road and locate assets, such as signs, all on our own. So when new routes are driven, well, when any route's driven, when it's updated and driven, there will be teams here at the department that will be able to go down those routes and collect the signs just like Fugro did for us. And then for our paper logging system, so sometimes it takes a little while before a route is driven again. So let's talk about the new portion of Interstate 49 in Bella Vista that just opened up, right? So we don't have a driven video log of that yet, but our maintenance sign crews do have a paper log of that route. So when they go out, they calibrate their vehicles. And when they're installing the signs, they're writing down the log mile location and what side of the road that sign is on, and a little description of it. So we're able to take those logs and put them into the database and map them out and be able to locate those signs from the logs. So here's an example here. This is actually down in Southwest Arkansas. Took this log, put in all the information, mapped them out, and then just as a test for you guys, wanted to zoom in. So this is the area that we're looking at, and there was a stop sign here and a street sign here. And then we go down to street view level, and you guys can see that stop sign and street view level, all from this piece of paper that we were able to put in the database. So some pretty great data that's existed here for years. That's very reliable that we can use to help maintain this system. And then we have a new field app that's been developed. In fact, that Kevin Weston that I mentioned helped out with this presentation that he developed from our maintenance division for our sign crews to be able to use. So when they're going out in the field, they're able to stop and mark where they replaced a sign or install a new sign and put in all the information about that. So we can in turn grab that information from that database and maintain or update the sign inventory with that. All right, well, there's been some mass updates, right, that have happened since we've collected all these signs. One of those, I'm sure you guys can appreciate, is the new 75-mile-an-hour signs or speed limit along most parts of the interstate system across the state. So when Fugro collected these signs, again, this was 2020 when they were collecting, so the speed limit hadn't changed yet. So they collected all of the 70-mile-an-hour signs on the interstate. So thankfully, with these paper logging system, we were able to map out where all of these 75-mile-an-hour installed signs were to know which 70-mile-an-hour signs we needed to replace in the database with 75 miles per hour. And now we just need pictures. So when our truck goes out there and records or drives those routes, we'll be able to snap those pictures of those signs and get them updated in the database as well. All right, so something else happened that also caused us to have a mass update of signs. I don't know if you guys saw in the news later in July of 2021. So we had a state law that said slower traffic, keep right on our divided highway system. Well, the state law changed towards the end of July, and now it's left lane for passing only. So all of these slower traffic, keep right signs had to change. So this was the magic of the database, and really just having that database. So one of our top administrations said, well, all the districts are going to have to go out there and they're going to have to drive the roads and count the number of signs that they need. And somebody was like, hey, what about that new sign database? So they gave us a call, and we were able to query out quickly where all of those slower traffic keep right signs were, so they'll know exactly where they needed to replace left lane for passing only. Same days and hours of work across the board, and really brought to life how useful this sign database could be. All right, so let's have some fun with signs with Sharon and Kevin. Here we go. All right, total number of signs in the database today. So before I flash up that number, I just wanted to give you guys a map, and you're welcome to guess in your head how many signs you think are across the state. All right, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 637,427 signs today in the database that we have. All right, so number of signs by color, by percentage. So these are all the percentages of the color of signs out there. There's that purple sign, right? That one sign that's in the database. But you guys will see that yellow is the predominant color of signs across the state. Yellow are for our safety signs that are out there. So lots of safety-oriented signs out on the roadways for everybody. All right, and how about the shape of signs? So what's the most popular shape? Square and rectangle make up 87% of the shapes out there of the signs. So for a long time here at the department, I would hear that possibly folks didn't know, our sign crews didn't know exactly where the county line was to be able to put the county line signs. So you guys know when you guys cross the county boundary, there's a sign that announces that you're in that new county. So it was pretty exciting to be able to map out all of the county line signs to see how close we were. And you know, just from this map, checking it out, we are right on, right? We know where those county lines are. So 876 county line signs out there on the state highway system. And then how about those city limit signs, right? So you guys know when you're crossing into a city limit, you guys will see those signs, and it'll have the population for you along with the city name on there. So I just checked out Atkins right here, And it looks like, for the most part, we have all the signs correct. This was the 2010 population, but we forgot to replace a sign. And this still has the 2000 population on there. But the big news is we have over 1,400 signs to replace with the new 2020 census populations. But now we know where we have to replace them. We also did a test with our mile marker signs. So you guys know that mile marker signs are along the interstate, on our freeway system. And how do they know? How do our crews know which mile to put those signs on? So we took our road file and we calculated a mile right along our route file. And then we queried out the mile marker signs that the sign database collected. So in yellow is where we calculated where the mile should be from our route file, and in green is where the sign is. And you guys can see that it's almost perfect. These two, this was near the Conway area when they were doing construction. So these signs had been pulled up, so they didn't exist. But for the most part, that yellow and green are right together. All right, so a little fun with signs. So our farm machinery signs, so beware of farm machinery that might be crossing the highway or on the highway signs. And this is their distribution across the state. And then how about our slippery with wet signs across the state? Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about today is, are you waiting for a sign? And the answer, I hope, is yes. So here at the department, what I have SQL or SQL on here for is to let folks at the department know that we are publishing this data to SQL. We'll be able to share this out across the department through that data connection. Archiving is enabled, so we'll be able to go back in time eventually to see which signs were there compared to or were not there compared to what's there currently. And then we want to provide an easy way to view the signs for everybody across the department and to the public. And then I feel the need for speed. So when I was talking about an easy view for everybody, we've been looking at what Oklahoma DOT has been doing with their sign inventory. They actually have a dashboard where they offer a lot of their assets, one of those being their sign inventory. So you guys can see here lots of signs, right? So, we're thinking about something close to this and being able to just broadcast this out through ArcGIS Online. And then with our speed limit data information, the same. We are working on that database right now. It's not just a matter of here's all your signs. We want to make a linear speed limit database. So you will know how long that speed limit is good for. So right now, I have a great crew here in this office that's been working on that information. We have some issues here and there. Sometimes at the beginning of a route, there's not a speed limit sign. Sometimes the speed limit sign is up here, so we have to go through the data and fill in those gaps, make some assumptions. But eventually, we're hoping to have something that's going to be shareable across many platforms for many users. Here at the department, we have said that this will be our Christmas present to the department to have this speed limit database ready. And finally, I want to thank all these folks that you're seeing here on the screen for everything that they've done. These are all folks that work with the department to contribute to the sign database, and will contribute to the maintenance of the sign database. And then I'm happy to open it up for questions.
All right, absolutely. Excellent, Sharon. Thank you so much for that. So we will indeed open things up for questions. If you guys have any, feel free to, again, use the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom control screen and plug in that question. We have just a few minutes available to answer those.
Yeah, may I ask a question? This is Brian.
Absolutely.
Sharon, forgive me for not being as familiar with the Arnold database as you are, but I wondered, are speed limits included in the Arnold data structure, or will they be incorporated in future releases?
So Brian, they are not included right now in Arnold. There's a possibility they could be, but the problem is that Arnold might not be broken like the speed limits are broken. But there will certainly be ways where we could get the majority of that database to be able to merge those two together. But it won't be featured all the time in Arnold necessarily. Maybe on special cases or if somebody requests that from us. They'll still live separately.
I got you. Thank you.
All right. So if we don't have any other questions, I have come up with a couple of options here for people for a chance to win a 1-year subscription to an ArcGIS for personal use license. So the way we're going to do this, just to kind of refresh in case you weren't online at the very beginning, when the question is posed, if everyone can basically open their chat, and the first person to post the correct answer in the chat will be the winner. We've done things a little bit differently in the past, but we've kind of determined that this is a little more appropriate way. So first question, we'll see if anyone gets this one correct. Approximately how many signs are changed, added, or temporarily placed each year by ArDOT? All right. Wow. The very first person to answer was actually correct. So Stephen, congratulations to you. The correct answer was indeed 40,000. So you will receive information following today's webinar on your free 1-year subscription to an ArcGIS for personal use license. So thank you guys for participating in that. With our next presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Dill to present Quantifying Flooded Agriculture Land for Migratory Birds in the Mississippi Alluvial Plain. Annually, millions of dollars are spent within the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, MAV, by government agencies like the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Services, along with private organizations like Ducks Unlimited and the U.S. Rice Federation, to winter flood agriculture fields. The practice of flooding agriculture fields mimics seasonal wetlands that once covered the MAV and provide the 300 plus species of migratory birds food, cover, and resting areas on their journey. Verification of inventory of flooded acres happens through both procedure certification and field visits by conservation staff. Due to staff constraints and timing of site visits, the data collected can be skewed, giving estimates that do not accurately depict an area. The existence of a central repository of flooded acres currently does not exist. Using Google Earth Engine, Cropland, Data Layer, and archived data from Landsat, Sentinel, and Aster, we're able to gain estimates of flooded acres through time. In this study, we set out to develop a method for quantifying winter flooded migratory bird habitat on farmland using satellite data archives and estimates of total flooded acres through time. Our methods and results may be useful for conservation planning when deciding how to spend decreasing federal conservation funds. Patrick, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Chad. That was a great introduction. Like you said, my name is Patrick Dill. I'm a student here at Arkansas State University. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my master's project today. It's quantifying flooded agricultural land for migratory birds within the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. So we're going to start with a little geography and history type lesson. So the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, or the MAV, starts up here around Cairo, Illinois, and then follows the Mississippi River down through Arkansas and Mississippi and Illinois. And it sits at the base of the Mississippi Flyway, which is arguably one of the more important flyways in the United States. There's 4 of them. This one's more of a centralized one. More than 300 species of birds and nearly 40% of all the waterfowl and shorebirds pass through that. So they're coming from the prairie pothole region in Canada, and they're flying along the Mississippi River, and they will either stop and spend their winters here in Arkansas while we have such a great waterfall business here. But or they'll continue down to the coast. Before we settled this and changed the landscape, it was mostly wetlands, forests, swamps, some oxbows and sloughs, bottomland hardwoods, and it's pretty much all changed now. Here's the reason why. In 1849 and 50, we passed the Swamplands Act, and that allowed states to sell federal swampland. So this was land that they thought was not really worth anything. It was just a place for mosquitoes to grow, and it wasn't useful. So they were able to sell it to individuals, create revenue for the state, while also converting that ground to what's more useful as far as agriculture or small communities. In 1927, we had the Great Flood. It covered 27,000 square miles within Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and displaced 630,000 people. So the government does what the government does, and there was an issue, so they fixed it. So they created the 1928 Flood Control Act, and that helped channelize the Mississippi River, and also constructed a very elaborate system of levees along all the tributaries and the rivers that flow into the Mississippi River. So what that did was, prior to this, at the beginning of the spring, when snow melts and the river comes up, or if there's a lot of rain in the winter, the river would rise, and then all those surrounding areas would flood, and you create these seasonal wetlands, and they go down and just kind of go with the river. Well, we've gotten rid of that now. It's all going to be agricultural land without any seasonal flooding. Now, the Mississippi Alluvial Valley is 58% agricultural fields. So almost 60% of the entire MAV is crop fields. 32% is still forest or wetlands, 5% is developed land, and 5% is open water. The good part about it being agricultural fields and not developed land is that we can flood agricultural fields, and they mimic seasonal wetlands. So they provide the food, the resting areas, and they connect all the habitat that we've chunked up and kind of dispersed. Now, the issue and why this is important is we spend millions of dollars every year to incentivize farmers or landowners to flood up their fields. There's no accurate way to quantify exactly how many fields are flooded or the size of the flooding. And there's no single repository for somebody to go and say, well, how many fields were flooded last year? How many acres were flooded last year? And so the big part with this too is cost share drives a lot of conservation practices. And in an agronomic standpoint, like if you're trying to sell cover crop, there are these economic benefits to cover crop. It helps with nutrient staying on your field. It helps with erosion. So if you tell a farmer, hey, if you plant this cover crop, all these things are going to happen, and you're going to see these economic benefits from it. Well, they might be hesitant. So the government will pay them, $30, $40, whatever the amount is per acre. And then they're able to see that benefit after that first year. And then the hope is they continue to adopt that practice. With wildlife practices, though, there's really not an economic benefit on the back end. So once that money stops coming in from the government, what you can see in some studies is that it just stops. There's no permanent adoption of that. So we're going to see a couple examples of large amounts of money. The Arkansas Game and Fish has the RICE program, the Waterfowl Rice Incentives Conservation Enhancement. Last year, there was a little over 3,800 acres of rice fields enrolled and a little over 500 acres of wetland reserve easement acres. They pay for a actively pumped field $50 and a passively pumped field $25. So if we just paid at the $25 rate at 4,000 acres, you're looking for 4,000 acres, you're looking at $100,000 in 1 year for just the ability to lease the ground. It's not marketing this program. It's not for staff. It's just what we're paying to lease the ground. From 2019 to 20, the Rice Stewardship Program, which is Ducks Unlimited, USA Rice, and NRCS, they spent $19 million in 1 year. And if you look at it, it affected a lot of acres. It's a lot of money for 1 year for one program. In 2010, after the Deepwater Horizon, NRCS created the Migratory Bird Habitat Initiative. And they invested $40 million in a 4-year period. So that's roughly $10 million a year. And this isn't strictly just to flood the field. There's other practices that get involved, whether it's putting pipes in the fields or just other practices that help help make these practices possible. But it's still the goal is to create habitat for waterfowl and shorebirds through their migration. Traditionally, there's two types of techniques to monitor it. Self-certification, that's when a landowner or producer, they have a contract, they come in to their local NRCS office, or they call their rice tech with ducks and limit and say, hey, those 4 fields I'm supposed to flood. Well, we flooded those fields. And then they mark it off, and there's 440s, so you got 160 acres of flooded fields on a report somewhere. Or the conservation service, whether it's NRCS or Game and Fish or whoever, can send out an employee and have them verify that the fields are flooded. But the issue there is timing, because if they go out before it rains, the fields might look flooded or dry. But if they go right after a rain, it could look flooded, and then they don't have boards or anything in a box, and the fields just dry up. So there's issues with both of these, just because there's a huge human component, and you can't send somebody out there every week to check the field to make sure it's flooded to however large of an area it's supposed to be flooded. So what we're trying to do is use remote monitoring. It's not been done for flooding in agricultural fields, but it's been used in a lot of other conservation and agricultural practices. We've used it to map dry season rice, to monitor the surface water in a lake in Turkey. They used it in Chesapeake Bay to monitor cover crop performance. So the ability is there, and the data is there. We just haven't tried it or figured out the best way to go about it yet. So what we're going to use is Google Earth Engine as the platform. And what I really want to try to do is make this as free as possible. So when we get done with this, and hopefully it's a good product, and somebody in California, because California floods a lot for ducks, or maybe North Carolina, somewhere like that, they can look at it and say, oh, this would be interesting to see how this works here. And they can use Google Earth Engine because it's a free platform, and the script will be available, and they can just run it and try it there. We'll use Cropland Data Layer. It's a NAS product. It's a 30-meter resolution georeference layer that tells you what crop type was planted in what spot. So we're going to use that to mask out anything that's not crop. So we don't want to pick up rivers or little ponds or lakes or anything like that. We just want to know at the end of the year the water that was once a crop. We're going to use Prism data to pull in weather data. It's a mass repository of just weather data from all these different weather stations around the country. So we'll be able to get gridded data from that. The two main satellites, whenever you read anything, is normally Landsat and Sentinel. You're going to get a 30-meter resolution on Landsat, and you're going to get a different scene every 14 to 16 days. And the reason why this one to me is more important is because Landsat started in 1972. So there's almost 50 years of data there. So if we can figure out how to use it now, we can go back and show historical information all the way back to mid-70s possibly. Sentinel-2 has 2 polar orbiting satellites. So unlike Landsat, where there's one satellite going around, we have 2 satellites, so we get twice as much data from that one. So we're going to get every 5 to 10 days on that. And the cool part with that is NASA has went through and combined those 2 satellites in the harmonized Landsat Sentinel-2 data. So if you look at this graph, each one has a different band, and we'll use different bands to identify the water. Well, Landsat 8's 7-band and Sentinel-2 band somewhat lined up on the wavelengths, but Sentinel-2 is just a little bit smaller. And if you look over here, band 2 is about the same, but then band 3 and Landsat's a lot wider than in Sentinel. And NASA went through and they fixed all this and just created a product where you get Landsat and Sentinel images. So we're going from every 14 to 16 days or 5 to 10 days to every 2 to 3 days at 30 meters. So it's really good for what we're doing. You don't need like 1 meter resolution. You just need something that's going to give you a good representation of what's in the field. One of the other platforms we're going to look at is Aster. It's actually on the Terra satellite. And the reason why this is, I think it's going to be really cool, is that even with the Landsat and the Sentinel, what really makes the water pop is the near infrared band. And that's all Aster is infrared bands. There's 4 near infrared, 6 shortwave, and 5 thermal. So there's all these different ways to play with it and try to tweak it to see how we can get the best resolution on the water, or pick up the water the best. The issue is, unlike Sentinel and Landsat, where there's very distinct tracks or paths, Aster is kind of all over the place, and you can see that here. Here's a tile or a scene, and here's one, They kind of overlap, and they're not very. It's just harder to pinpoint what day it's going to be on where. And something was brought up in an earlier meeting. So I think what we're going to try to do is add Sentinel-1 into it, and it uses a synthetic aperture radar, and we can use a C-band to, what seems pretty cool if this works is you can see through clouds. So earlier today, I pulled 2 images. Both of these images are from October 28th of this year with 97.8% land cover, cloud cover on those. The one on the left is Landsat, so you can see it's just clouds. But on the right is the Sentinel-1 C-band, and there's no clouds. So it's not an issue. It's just, I'm not sure how efficient it's going to be as far as identifying the water. So it's going to be something fun to play with and see if this satellite is going to allow us to do that. They use it a lot in Asian stuff, or like around the rainforest where cloud coverage is going to be a larger issue. And then we're going to use collect data. We're going to go to the fields and use survey equipment to map out the area that's flooded in different fields within our sites. And that will give us our base area to say, okay, so if Landsat says it's 30 acres, but when we go out there, it's actually 25, we'll have something to compare it to that we know is accurate. Here's the dates for every path and tile for Landsat and Sentinel this winter. The green areas are during the waterfowl season breaks during waterfowl season. So there's they'll start waterfowl hunting this weekend. There'll be a short break. They'll start again. There'll be a short break. Then they'll start again before it ends. So these are dates that I'm going to try to get out on those days specifically because we're working with farmers and they like to hunt. And if we make them mad, then they might kick us off the field. So it's really important to try to make the farmers happy while we're doing this. But while we're out there, along with measuring how large of an area, we're going to collect turbidity samples and the depth of the water. Just because the muddier the water is, it seems like sometimes it's harder for the indices to pick it up, depending on which index you use. So we're going to keep track of how turbid the water is in each of these fields. So we've got 4 goals. Compare the predictive accuracy of satellite platforms in different indices. So that's where we're going to use the different satellites, and we're going to use different indices to try to map the flooded fields and see which one's a little bit more accurate. We're going to create monthly maps of the fields. We're going to analyze those maps with the PRISM data to see if we can identify if the fields are passively flooded, meaning that they put boards in a box or somehow dammed up their discharge pipes and just let precipitation fill up the fields, or if they use groundwater, surface water to pump up the fields. And then we're going to try to quantify the relationship between the conservation programs and how many fields and the acres that were flooded each year. So the first step is to establish field sites within the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. So what we did was we tiered this off. I started thinking we're just going to go to all the counties and measure everything. And the closer we got, you could tell it's not going to be, we can't do it. So we had to become more efficient at picking our sites. So anything within the Mississippi Alluvial Valley in Arkansas is data and it's good. So it's our tier 3, our lowest tier. And then when you step up to tier 2, it's where the Landsat scenes overlap. So there's a 30% overlap with Landsat. And if we pick a field anywhere within this red box right here, we double the amount of scenes that we get with Landsat. So for right here, we get the one pass, or if we're over here, we get one pass. But if we're right here, we'll get one pass here, then a few days later, we'll get another pass. So we'll double the data if we're there. And our tier 1, or our little golden area, is where Sentinel has it's an overlap, it's 3 miles wide, and it falls in the overlap of Landsat. And this is the only place in Arkansas that it happens, and somehow it happened directly over us, or the only place in Arkansas within the Mississippi Alluvial Valley that this happens, where you get Landsat and Sentinel overlapping. So we're going to determine if the fields are past flood or actively flooded by talking to the farmers. We will go to the fields, like I said, measure the extent of the flooding, how deep the water was, and the turbidity. And we're going to base it off those dates that we saw earlier on from where the field is to what dates those satellites are going to flow, so we can keep it pretty accurate. Then we're going to use the validation data to compare the flooded field with non-flooded pixels. And then we're going to mask out all the non-crop land using CDL. So this, earlier we brought up CDL. This is a picture of CDL from their side. And then I pulled all the data and just kept it to the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. And this is what's left over when you only use corn, cotton, rice, milo, soybeans, or fallow. So if it's one of those 6 crops, it is right here. And that's 98% of this. Then we're going to calculate using different indices. And right now, the normalized difference vegetation index is what a lot of people use. And again, it goes back to it, that near infrared band is absorbed by water. So it really makes the water pop. It's black whenever you look at a scene of it. So normalized difference water index is also very popular. And then the turbidity index. And that just goes to see if we do have a field that's maybe a little shallower and it's more turbid. Does that pick it up better than NDVI or NDWI? And then what we want to do is compare the indices and classifications with what we've seen in the field. We're going to use the root mean squared error to figure this out. And basically, we're just going to subtract what we saw in the field from what the computer says squared, and then we get the square root of that. And the smaller, it's closer to 0 it is, the higher accuracy it is. All right, so task 2, or goal 2, we're going to gather all the satellite images from 2013 to 2020 within what we call a flooding season. So it would be like October to March. And this is just a chart or a little graph to show you kind of, this is a 40-acre field in Poinsett County. This is a 15-meter pixel, 30-meter, and then a 250. So 30 meters what we're going to get with Landsat. 15-meter you can get with the near infrared. So if we're just using a near infrared band, we'll get a little bit smaller. And then 250 is what you would expect with like MODIS or something like that. And it's why we're not using those satellites, because it's too large of a pixel. It's going to take up the whole field. We're going to filter out all the images with 10% or more cloud cover. And here's just an example of what that looks like. Now we're going to take the images and we're going to use the indices that we used earlier. And we're going to identify and break out what is a flooded field or a flooded acre versus not flooded. And this is using NDVI within Poinsett County last winter. And this is kind of what we would expect to see is anything that's blue is what it was considered to be water. And so you're going to see like little issues, like here's a random piece of water and there might be a low spot on that field. And there's little gaps here and here. Here's a gap, but you can see how it's kind of discolored. Here's a road leading to a well, so that's why that's not flooded. But this is kind of what we're shooting for. Then our third goal was to see how the weather data, if we could use the weather data with the flooding maps to see if there's a rain event and we see, flooding here, that could almost be considered passively flooded. Whereas if there was a rain event, but it was already flooded and there was no rain events prior to that, you could almost consider it an actively flooded field. So we're going to try to figure out if there's a way to more accurately say, okay, these fields were based off of weather data and time series models, that this was flooded or this was not flooded using surface or groundwater. And then the last one, and this is what I'm kind of the most excited about, is we're going to go from 2013 and 21 initially and try to quantify how many fields or acres were flooded. This is like a quick run through that I did in Poinsett County and how many acres were flooded using NDVI. And so the cool part about this, I think, is going to be, I don't know, let me go to the next slide. I'm just giving ahead of myself. We're going to generate trend lines, add those, and then we're going to overlay the programs. So what I'm saying there is 2011 through 14, there was a lot of water. All of a sudden there's a spike in 15, 16, and then it goes up, a good 10,000 acres and just kind of stays there. Why is that? So in 2016 was the first year that the Rice Stewardship Program started paying people to flood. So can we see a correlation between the programs? And maybe after that program's over with, do we see that program is still adopted or does it drop down? So in 2010 to 14, when NRCS paid the $40 million because of the Deepwater Horizon, if you look at those areas where they put a lot of money into it, do we see that influx? Do we see a surge in acres that are flooded? And then does it stay there? Does it maintain at whatever level it was, or does it drop back down afterwards? But so going forward, this will be our first field season. And the biggest issues that we're expecting to see is the cloud coverage. If it stays cloudy, it's been cloudy every day this week. Landsat Sentinel is not going to be available, but because we're going to use multiple platforms and we've got what dates, to go out on for which platforms, I think we're going to be able to avoid that. And now adding Sentinel-1 to that and being able to see through the clouds. I think that's going to be pretty cool, and hopefully we can avoid that limitation. Rain events leading to field dates and not being able to go to it. Farmers don't like it if you go on their fields when they're muddy. You tear the roads up and they have to do extra work to fix them at the beginning of the year. So if the field's way out there and you got to go across a lot of mud, you're going to make farmers mad. And what we've done there to try to limit that is we've picked all of our sites next to gravel or paved roads. There's a couple that aren't next to them, but we've really tried to only pick fields around gravel or paved roads. And then a limited time. I mean, right now to March, that's it. And then if it's cloudy every day, you really don't have a lot of chances. So keeping that calendar of the dates that we're able to go to the field and collect data for each satellite is important because that will allow us to be more efficient. And then having all the equipment ready to go. We're once everything's ready, we can go and we don't have to wait or try to make it work last minute. So what do we want out of this is a code for Google Earth that can be shared. And that way, like I said earlier, anybody in the country or anywhere, I guess, could use this and say, we flood X amount of fields in California or in South Carolina or wherever. Both those are big duck hunting areas. That's why I'm bringing those up. It'll allow conservation planners to have an accurate amount of acres when they're doing their plans. So if the Game and Fish wants to make sure that there's enough flooded fields leading into the 21-22 season and they don't think it's going to be there, so maybe they come up with a new program to pay farmers. Or if NRCS says, hey, look, we're not doing our part here, we need to add more acres. There's nowhere right now for them to look to see how many acres are being flooded. So this should give them a way to come up with a good number. and then the historical estimates of flooded acres. And this is just going to show us and other agencies moving forward, when we spend a lot of money here, is this worth it? You know, if we spend a lot of money and pay people to flood their fields, do they continue to flood their fields, or do they stop immediately afterwards? Or should we switch and move our money to maybe permanent wetland creation? Or maybe this is perfect and this is what we need to continue to do, especially with the way farm machinery is. The more precise, the more efficient it is, the less waste rice there's available. So as we move forward and as farming progresses, these acres become more important, because if there's not enough acres, there's not enough food for the ducks or the shorebirds. I want to thank my thesis committee, Dr. Allen, who's here, Dr. Reba and Massey, who work for ARS, and Dr. Shu, who's at U of A. Right now, we're working with 10 farmers, and ultimately, I can't do this without the farmers. There's actually 9 farms and the Northeast Arkansas Rice Research and Extension Center. There's a new one in Greenfield, Arkansas, and they're allowing us to come out on a couple of their fields. And we're working pretty closely with Ducks Unlimited right now, and they're helping us collect data and helping us identify new sites. So without them, some of this, we wouldn't have some of the sites we have. So all these people have made this possible, and that's why I'm here today. So if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. That was an absolutely outstanding presentation. Excellent work. So we'll open things up for questions for Patrick and anything on his presentation. Again, if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the Q&A option, and we have just a few minutes to answer those questions. We, of course, also open things up to our panelists as well, if you guys have any feedback.
Patrick, I know a lot of people know that there's a lot of duck hunting in this region. You want to talk about some of the main species that you expect to see, or types of species? You said a little bit about shorebirds versus other types of birds.
So, and this goes back to, we're going to try to identify a little bit better too what it's flooded, or if it's a flood or a muddy flat, because you'll see a lot of like mallards and pintails is what a lot of people are going to go for. That's like the good ducks. But shorebirds use this a lot too, and nobody really cares about shorebirds because they don't really bring revenue into the state or anywhere. But a lot of shorebirds are listed as, endangered or possibly even endangered. So, and they don't use that flooded part. They use the mud flats. They'll use a little bit of the water, but they're not all right there. So the extent is I'll bring up waterfowl a lot because it's what brings money into the state, right? It's what drives the farmers to flood their fields anyways. Most of them are flooding the field so they can duck hunt, or so they can lease out their fields to duck hunters. But the positive part of this is that it also benefits a lot of other species. Like I said, there's 300 and something species that use the flyway. Well, there's not that. There's like 30 species of waterfowl. I'm making that number up in my head right now, so don't quote me on that. But it's not a lot. It's really around like 30 or 40. So the benefits for the shorebirds are way higher than what we see it very, like right down the tunnel. Here's why we do it. Here's what we're doing for. But the impact and the benefits of this are way greater. So that probably didn't answer the question at all. But.
I mean, you talked about the shorebirds, and I think a lot of people think of just the waterfowl. That's what I was trying to get out of you. You did it.
All right. So it looks like a comment from Ava. Very interesting. Thank you, Patrick, for that. I have to admit, personally, I'm kind of thinking of a consulting opportunity here. I grew up duck hunting in my family farms, and to be honest with you, I don't know that a lot of people are aware of the benefits, both in conservation and fiscally, from this program. So kudos to you for bringing this, I guess, to bringing attention to it. So, all right. With that said, I've got a couple of questions I've worked up to give away another 1-year subscription for ArcGIS for personal use. I like to go all the way back to the very beginning. So the first question, everybody get their chat ready and open, is going to be, what percentage of waterfowl and shorebirds pass through the Mississippi Alluvial Valley? All right, congratulations, Scott Alsbrook. Looks like everybody got it right. First answer I see pop on the screen, 40%. That is correct. You have one. Yeah, so it looks like almost everybody. All right, so thank you guys for that. We'll get that subscription out to you, Scott, following today's presentation. So coming up next, I would like to introduce Robert Kacir to present Introduction to OpenStreetMap on the basics of OpenStreetMap schema, where OSM data comes from, how to extract OSM data into shapefiles, and how it is used for both humanitarian and commercial uses. Robert, we'll turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you, Chad. So I think a lot of us have maybe vaguely heard of OSM before. So if you ever open up ArcMap, you'll probably have seen a base map option for OpenStreetMap, and you think, oh, that's just another Esri map option for your base map. Well, it's a little bit more than that. It's entirely independent from Esri. So OSM is really the best way to describe it is it's sort of a map version of Wikipedia. Like anyone can contribute to it as a crowdsourced data source, and it has coverage across the entire globe. But it is constructed very differently from other types of data sets we're more used to. So it uses topological data model rather than the spaghetti model that a lot of us are used to, that is coming to geodatabases. And it comes out of a UK nonprofit that does a lot of good work. And it's just a combination largely of government data sources that get uploaded, and after they get uploaded, then people start editing them. So as I mentioned, the spatial model is a little bit different. So the one that we're used to is the spaghetti model. And as you can see, geometrically redundant. Let's say you have polygons, and they need to share some sort of edge. Well, with traditional spaghetti or geodatabase model that Esri has, and frankly that shapefiles and geodatabases are both reliant on, you have redundant points. So you have 2 points on that single location. You have a line going across it that is also redundant. But in a topological model, all nodes are shared and all lines are shared. So because these 2 points share the exact same locations, only 1 point, and it's stored in a bit of a table like this. If anyone who's been in the industry long enough to deal with coverages, that's the sort of model essentially that it's doing there. And this different topological model, it leads to some interesting editing issues when you end up in very dense areas. But it's a bit different from what we're used to typically as geospatial professionals. Another thing is that it doesn't really have attributes like a traditional shapefile or geodatabase. It goes with keys. So you'll have a key, and then you have a value for it. So common ones will be like highway equals footway, or level as in like first level of a building, second level of a building. Is it underground? Level's a common one. So basically kind of acts like Twitter hashtags a little bit. And so this kind of means that this data source is flexible enough to store literally anything. But at the same time, it's also so extremely flexible that it's hard to necessarily get anything useful out of it. if anyone can just create their own conventions. It's a bit like a wild, wild west out there. But in exchange, even though you can literally put any tag and any value you want on something, a lot of the editing tools sort of push you toward a specific convention or a number of different conventions that you can use, and so that sort of encourages things to be useful in some sort of way. So these conventions are dictated by a wiki that contains each of the different value pairings, and it can really get rather complicated. But there's only really a handful of different combinations that are really commonly used. The ones that I find that are most useful would be highway equals footway, some kind of walking path, highway equals residential. So street tags and other tags vary depending upon what kind of country you're in. So even though something might be considered residential in the US, for a road type may not be residential in another country, let's say in sub-Saharan Africa. And one that I use a lot is building equals yes. That's just, hey, it's some sort of building structure. Natural equals water. Land use equals residential. Defining a large area that people live in. And there's a lot more, but I find those the most common use. So there's a lot of different roadway tags, since originally OpenStreetMap kind of started as a routing project for getting people to different destinations. So that's why it has the topological model it does, but it's greatly expanded beyond that. So there's a number of different editors out there to edit the crowdsourced data. And the most common of those that you'll see, and it's really easy to use, is you have the ID editor. It's a web browser based editor that basically has a lot of the conventions directly built in. You can edit the underlying tags a little bit, but it's, after 5 or 10 minutes, no GIS experience, you can jump right into it pretty easy. But then the JSON editor is more of the advanced version. And there's actually a Java-based application that you install on your computer. And generally what I find is that if you have an area that is really dense with points, the ID editor will have a tendency of making it so that when you're trying to tie different points together, it'll encourage you to snap to the nearest point, and that becomes unbearable when the point density is really high. And so JSON is much better for those types of scenarios where just your density there is really high. But the majority of people are going to be using your ID editor. So I think I said that it is based out of the UK. So it's run by volunteers. There is one paid staff member. I checked when I originally started doing OSM work, toying with it. Everyone's volunteer. Now they have enough money to hire a secretary, but that's it. And overall, just you have a lot of automated bots that come inside and fix different errors where tags don't make sense, and geometry doesn't necessarily make the most sense, and you have people in the organization that are involved with bulk updates. You'll find I think there are actually some counties in Arkansas that have uploaded address points into OpenStreetMap. And so there are groups that are in charge of handling those bulk updates without causing major issues for the server, because if too many people do bulk uploads, the whole thing slows down. So if you want to actually work with OSM data, it comes out in an interesting format. It's kind of a global file with the extension of .osm. Global meaning, or global or planet file, meaning that it literally covers the entire globe. It's rather kind of big. So normally what you end up doing is you need to get it down to a smaller area for download. And then after you've downloaded it, because you have all these tags with different values on them, it needs to, when you want to create a shapefile, you need to extract the specific tags and then convert those tags into your shapefile. You just have to kind of take the Wild West and force it into a mold. And there are a lot of different tools out there with varying levels of skill and difficulty and ease of use. So generally, some of the ones that I really like using is there's actually a set of 2 different QGIS plugins. One of them allows you to just simply zoom into an area, and then whatever the extent is in your map, download the entire OSM file for it. And then there's another QGIS plugin that can then take that OSM file and extract the tags you want into a shapefile. And there's a number of different areas where you can download your files if you want something on a state, county, or country level. But some of the ones that are more interesting, that are really easy to use, Hot OSM, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, has an easy download tool that actually you can just specify your download area and you'll be able to extract building footprints and other data that would be important for someone who's doing humanitarian work. Another interesting one is Esri actually has a number of different feature services that are actually locked into the live OSM Planet file that is hosted by the UK nonprofit. And so you can actually use your Esri software to consume feature services that are tied in with the most common and useful tags. So there's building tags and there's land use tag services that Esri has actually built on this, and they'll update in almost real time as edits come in. Another thing too is that you have Mapbox has actually created this OSM change set quality control tool set that allows different people to sort of police the tagging on various elements. So if there's particular tags that violate the conditions or are not so advisable, it can flag those, and then you can go through and see if someone's being a bad actor, you can address it. Or if just someone's doing bulk updates without asking the committee, you can easily detect that. Another amazing tool I've played with that is really good for base maps. If you've ever tried making your own base map with REST services, you kind of have some speed issues, particularly tied to your hardware that you're using. There's a company called Cardo, formerly known as CartoDB, and they have a base map hosting service that just pulls on OpenStreetMap data, and you can just extract whatever particular tags and common groups that you want, and it will give you, you can style a base map literally any way you want, and it's very responsive and will update live with whatever the OSM edits are. And then we have, as another particular group, we have OpenStreetMap, Hot OSM. So Hot OSM is a very interesting group that I've done a fair number of piece of work for. Hot OSM, they're generally HOT stands for Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, OpenStreetMap Team, or HOT OSM. And they have a task manager product. They have yeah. And the task manager actually will list out different types of projects you can go into, listing out based upon priority. Some of these things are for the Red Cross, and a lot of these projects involve doing things like adding in streets into areas of the world that don't have streets, just based upon imagery, or digitizing huts in refugee camps to be able to estimate how many people are there. And OSM is just a platform that allows any humanitarian group or government agency who doesn't have the resources in order to host their project here, have the crowdsource sort of herd the crowdsourcing sheep in the direction of getting your project done. And it typically involves a initial production, and then they have validators that will, the volunteer validators that will go in behind and validate the crowdsourced data, but both the quality control and the initial creation of the data are both crowdsourced. Oops, where did I go with that? Oh. Yeah. So it's so they'll partner with different groups. So you have the Red Cross. They do a number of projects, as well as the World Bank, Clinton Health Access Initiative, Peace Corps, United Nations, and you'll find a lot of their government agencies in some of these very rural countries just don't have the resource in order to create a national data set for their road network or simply population mapping, and so they'll rely on OSM to take care of that labor for them. So one thing the guys may have remembered was Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico, and they actually did have OSM had a project in order to map some of the buildings there in order to direct humanitarian resource in order where people are actually living. So building on this humanitarian sort of theme here, we also have other products that help direct your crowdsourcing. So often when you're digitizing buildings for humanitarian purposes in these rural areas, there'll be vast swaths of land with no buildings. And so rather than having your desktop mappers or volunteers spending hours and hours just spanning through empty imagery, MapSwipe has kind of come along. It's a mobile app that allows people to sort of identify whether or not they're buildings to begin with. So then later on, then those particular tiles that were identified here will actually be able to be pushed over to the people who are actually going to be doing the core mapping of it. And your detailed volunteers digitizing individual building footprints won't have to span through nearly as many blank tiles of imagery. And so MapSwipe is just as it appears. You go ahead and tap on the squares where the buildings, and then you swipe along and select image set. One of the other groups that that OSM does work for, Hot OSM, is you have the Missing Maps project. So I think a lot of us know that map data is powerful, but there's many parts of the world that don't have any mapping data or very limited data. And simply, if it's not on the map, it's not going to be part of planning. It isn't going to be accounted for. If you actually have that data there, then potentially you can at least begin to give aid or consider certain groups of people when they're finally on the map. And so the Missing Maps project works with Hot OSM team, and they add in various projects to add data for different areas that just are totally lacking any GIS data at all. And here's some of the more interesting ones. So Facebook, I guess now called Meta, created this interesting tool set. They forked the GitHub repository for the ID editor that people commonly use, and they created their own editor. And this editor hosts data that was actually created using AI. So it hosts various types of street and building data that was generated via AI, but we're not sure on the quality. And so the idea is that you crowdsource the quality control. So if someone says, hey, this building imagery is good, it's good, you can just go add. And then if it needs to be modified or is totally terrible, then someone who's using their editor can then just avoid using. I've found that for Little Rock area, I've used it, and it's not particularly fantastic. I think it's their AI was created more for areas with low resolution imagery. But it's an interesting project. So of the various contributors and consumers, so Facebook has contributed those building footprints. Apple Maps is actually much more tied in with OSM than I would have ever guessed. If you go into the OSM change set monitor and you go ahead and look and see what types of users are adding things, you'll find there are actually people who will work full time on the Apple Maps team, and they'll actually Apple Maps will pull on OSM data. Sometimes for most of their stuff, sometimes for just some different types of data sets, whether that's buildings or water features, but they'll pull from that and rather than maintaining their own data set. And when they find inaccuracies or things that need to get fixed, they'll just go ahead and edit it themselves. So that's one thing I've found. Microsoft Azure Maps. Microsoft actually donated several million building footprints to OSM, and specifically, I think due to their need, because they're tying in their map product offering into OSM data. TomTom and MapQuest have used OSM data for their stuff. MapQuest doesn't use it anymore, but they used to for their stuff. Mapbox, if any of you have had custom web viewers created before, Mapbox is a company. They create their own map API and based off of Leaflet, and they are heavily tied into OSM. And so that you'll find they actually write a lot of tools to help quality control OSM. And generally, there are just a lot of apps and different things that tie in OSM data that you never would have thought of. For government data sources, but I would encourage you to look at different data sets you might find out there in the world, or different map products, and then cross-reference via the OSM map and see how close is this? Could this have come from OSM? Because anyone can pull in OSM data to their projects as long as they give consent. Google is not on this list. Google has a bit of a contentious relationship with OSM. They have their own Google Locals program, which kind of somewhat competes with OSM in their crowdsourcing, because Google will take crowdsourced local edits, quality control them, and add them to Google Maps. So you can't really take Google data and bring it in OSM, and similarly OSM data can't go into Google. But a lot of these groups use this data, and you'll find there are some groups, I believe it's UPS actually has editors editing Little Rock delivery data. So like trying to route different people, different delivery services directly to different loading docks. And they have people in, I think, Eastern Europe, countries like Serbia, that are editing our data here according to data provided by drivers. So I'd say that OSM is a lot more like Linux and QGIS than it is Wikipedia overall, because there's a lot of companies that are just heavily invested in it because it was free initially for them. And then to make it better for their own personal purposes, they're spending a lot of time, resources, either improving the data quality itself or providing and maintaining tools that help make data quality possible. You'll find that actually Esri, Mapbox, and Microsoft all open their API keys for their imagery inside of the OSM viewer, because it's something they benefit from. And so they just provide that free access for OSM users. And Mapbox and Apple directly edit data, in addition to probably a lot of other companies that we weren't even thinking of, where they just have people that do that full time because it benefits them. So do you guys have any questions?
All right. Thank you for that, Robert. Outstanding presentation. So once again, we'll open things up for questions. If you guys have any, feel free to share those now.
I have a question, Chad.
Sure.
For Robert. It looked like all of the lines, the edges between those nodes were straight line segments. Is it possible to have arcs?
I don't think it does arcs. I could be mistaken. The funny thing about OSM is that it technically doesn't have polygons. It only has points and lines, and all a polygon is just a line that closes on itself and has been tagged as an area rather than a line.
Okay.
Hey, Robert, I have a question, or a comment, I should say.
All right.
Thanks for presenting this, by the way. I am a huge fan of OpenStreetMap and the editors, and I take advantage of the OpenStreetMap data within ArcGIS all the time. As a matter of fact, I didn't dive into editing until about 2 or 3 years ago, when I needed to correct the Esri version of OpenStreetMap as a base map.
Mm-hmm.
So I used a free app. It's called GoMap for my Apple device. And I updated using up-to-date imagery, a lake here in Northwest Arkansas, Lincoln Lake in particular. It wasn't existing in the OpenStreetMap database. So I decided to fix that myself, because I really wanted to use that as a base map. And I missed Lincoln Lake. I went in and added it. 15, 20 minutes later, it shows up in the Esri service. So I made a comment and shared it with everyone in the chat about, I tested this and been playing around with it. And while I have made some updates to streets within campus area and around Northwest Arkansas, I haven't done any bulk updates. I do know of a few individuals here in Northwest Arkansas that are bulk updaters. And let me tell you something, that contribution is huge. And I think we as GIS nerds are missing out on the fact that we should probably be pushing the public domain data into OpenStreetMap particularly in rural Arkansas. I think it's a great asset to have, and it's important. But quite honestly, my needs were selfish. I needed to have a lake boundary in the map, and I didn't have it. So I went out and spent a weekend, or excuse me, an hour on a Saturday updating that just for my own good. But I just wanted to commend you for pointing this out, and I think it's very valuable. And from what I hear, there are a lot of data providers and imagery companies that develop base data around the world, and part of their deliverables is typically an OpenStreetMap data format for the area of interest. So it's not going to go away. I think we ought to take the chance, take advantage of the fact of our personal knowledge of mapping and our skills, and contribute where we see it as appropriate. I'll get off the soapbox, but thanks, man. Appreciate you sharing this with us. It's great. I'm going to post a link to this particular app that I've been playing around with.
I will say, to your point about bulk updates, is there's a lot of state GIS offices that will actually coordinate the process of getting data into OSM, and there are different processes in order to update something that's already in OSM. So if you have a data set that you'd be like, well, if I put it in OSM but it's live, I'm editing it over here, the minute I toss it in there, it's going to be out of date. There are ways in which you can stick some kind of unique ID on it and then run an update on it later after you've maybe annually or every few years. I think we do that with the Tigerline data set in OSM.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would echo that, Brian, your sentiments. And in fact, Robert, something that you mentioned that I have actually become quite familiar and used quite often is a data source that Microsoft has made available that they actually reportedly say is an autonomously generated product from machine learning, basically analyzing imagery and producing those building footprints that you've mentioned. I've kind of developed my own little methodology of in the work that I do. I go from city to city and work on design and engineering in different cities, from one project to the next. And so finding a common building footprint data source was important for me. And that was one that I've really benefited from. So I would definitely say that for sure. All right. So if there's hold on, let's see what's in the chat here. Okay, so just some information shared there, so you guys be sure to check that out. So if there are no other questions, I have a question for you guys to win these last 3 ArcGIS for personal use license. And then first, in reflection of Robert's presentation, thank you again for that. Something I'd like to key back on, and so everybody get their chat ready. The first person to answer wins. Question is, what is the name of the advanced OSM editor that Robert mentioned? All right, Clayton, you are absolutely right. JSOM is the correct answer, so you have won our 3rd license of the day. All right, so a couple of more questions just to round it out. We had a total of 5, limit 1 per participant. So the next question is going to be, if everyone's ready, and this is a more geospatial technical question than it is GIS. The question is, what does the abbreviation GNSS stand for? All right, Jake Norris, congratulations. You got that correct. Global Navigation Satellite System. For everyone's knowledge, it's actually an acronym meaning the combination of all the orbiting global positioning satellite systems. So we refer to all of them as GNSS as a whole. All right, one final question. This one we have used before, but we kind of got to give ourselves some props in doing this. So the final question is, in what year was the Arkansas GIS User Forum founded? That's right, Rusty, but do you really need an ArcGIS for personal use license? Looks like the second answer
They just
was,
had to put it in there.
okay. So it looks like the second correct answer was Ava. Congratulations. That correct answer is 1990. Greg, you also got it correct. So Rusty, if you will yield your winning, we'll give it to the second correct answer for that final fifth ArcGIS for personal use license.
Definitely will wield it.
I know you've had enough GIS in your life. You don't need to do it at home too.
You've got that right.
So that will round out all of the prize giveaways. So thanks everyone for that. One final plug for today before we sign off. This Arkansas GIS Day presentation has been recorded and it will be uploaded and provided on our YouTube channel. We would ask that everyone go and visit our YouTube channel and subscribe to our page. I've created a shortcut link, just a quicker, easier way to get to it. Just visit argisusers.org/YouTube and it'll take you directly to our YouTube page. So that will conclude our Arkansas GIS Day 2021 celebration. We would like to thank everyone for their participation today, especially our panelists and our presenters. So thank you all once again, and on behalf of the Arkansas GIS User Forum, thank you and have a great day.